No foreign doctors and nurses yet, but all kinds of medical supplies are needed.
Surgical packs, scalpels, bandages, intraoperative medications, both antibiotics and otherwise. Probably blankets. We could use IV solutions and fluids.
Northwest medical teams have a small amount of such material on hand, but much more will be needed, from sterile syringes to blood transfusion kits. The volunteers are asking for donations of supplies from medical and pharmaceutical companies and cash to purchase more. Timing is critical.
What we would like to achieve is expedite everything. They need all the supplies right away. So a delay of 1 day might mean dozens or hundreds of lives we can save. So I urge everybody who is in charge to cut all the red tape and just let it go.
A Romanian Airlines cargo plane is being ready to pick up the material collected in several
donations to buy supplies. And surprise, surprise, it was a busy day at the stores today. We'll show you all that and more at 6.
Thank you, Kim.
A moment off the beaten path now, a stop in the woods.
Made by photographer Jim
Radio's office, still ringed by
Revolution back in Panama.
And Charles Carrault on the road and counting birds in this season of partridges in the opposed leader Ceausescu, photographs of Ceausescu on trial and his body after he and his wife were executed by firing squad. As fierce civil war apparently tapered off somewhat today, the first stress cracks appeared in the new Romanian provisional government and signs of more turmoil and possible violence to come. Bob Simon is on the scene.
He was defiant to the end. The trial of Nicolae Ceausescu, broadcast on Romanian television tonight, revealed the captured leader and his wife Ileana refusing to recognize the court which was accusing them of crimes against the people. Minutes later, they were dead, executed by a firing squad at an undisclosed location.
In Bucharest today, people said it was unfortunate that the man who called himself the greatest Romanian in history could die only once, and so quickly.
We all say he died too much easier, too much easier. He should have been punished much more terribly.
His legacy was being dealt with outside Bucharest today. A new cemetery was under construction. The old one did not have room for 3,000 fresh graves for the victims of Ceausescu's last massacre. Children and old people, but students mainly. Students who demonstrated at Bucharest University last Saturday when Ceausescu called in the guns. New heroes, new leaders. The new government of Romania was displayed on television today. The president, Ian Iliescu, credentials, a senior communist who'd been demoted by Ceausescu and who was a friend of Gorbachev. He promised free elections in April. The tanks were still in the streets today, and there were other signs of extraordinary times, like food, more variety in more stores than people could remember, and newspapers with names like Spark of the People, Truth, Liberty. New first editions coming out every day in such demand that self-appointed town criers read them out loud to crowds. Real reprisals have not begun yet, but the old guard is being rounded up. Familiar faces spotted by people who'd been imprisoned, interrogated, and tortured. Ceausescu's poet laureate sought refuge at the American embassy, but was pulled away by an angry crowd. And more anger is coming to the surface. The people of Romania took the extraordinary step of killing their old leader, and many are saying that the new leaders they saw on television today wear too many of the same Stalinist stripes. The Romanian Revolution may have just begun. Bob Simon, CBS News, Bucharest.
President Bush announced a $500,000 emergency aid package for Romania today, mostly medical supplies to be distributed through the International Red Cross. Additional U.S. aid...
It found them guilty of, quote, genocide and other grave crimes. Also, there is concern tonight about the future of Romania, where the popular uprising against the Ceausescu regime was so sudden that little thought and virtually no preparation had been given to ruling Romania without him. Our first report is from ABC's John Donovan in Bucharest.
They were shouting, "Show us the bodies," in Bucharest Central Square this morning, demanding proof from the new government that Nicolae Ceausescu was finally and truly dead. 2 hours later, Romanian television gave them this proof: roughly edited pictures of Ceausescu and his wife in captivity, and then Ceausescu after the firing squad. But whatever satisfaction his death gives Romanians, and that appears to be plenty, it means they are now left with no one they can all hate together. That hatred, more than anything else, is what drove Romania's revolution. Now all the talk is of organizing a democracy. But organization seems a skill Romania's new leaders are still only learning. The new government is self-proclaimed, mostly intellectuals and politicians who suffered under Ceausescu. Ian Iliescu is the new president, a much admired man who once lost his job as a Communist Party secretary for criticizing Ceausescu. But few of the new faces have a real following among the people. Their lack of experience and Romania's lack of any real tradition of democracy in its long history worries Romanians, like this former intelligence officer who broke with Ceausescu years ago.
We don't know to live in liberty. We don't know what is democracy. And the biggest danger is anarchy.
But right now, only the army stands in the way of anarchy. The civil war of the last few days is not quite over. Soldiers are still searching out members of Ceausescu's secret police who tried to turn back the people's revolution with gunfire. Today was quieter than yesterday. People are beginning to clean up this battered city, but they are angry rather than joyous. For a nation trying to feel its way toward democracy, there could have been better ways to start. John Donovan, ABC News, Bucharest.
Late today, Romanian television showed new pictures of Ceausescu at his trial. It showed an angry Ceausescu arguing with his judges. "I do not recognize this court," he said. "Read the Constitution." To which an off-screen voice replied, "We've read the Constitution. We know it better than you." Unlike other countries in Eastern Europe, there's no long-standing opposition movement in Romania to move in and take charge. During the 24 years of the Ceausescu regime, day-to-day living was so harsh that it was difficult for most people to think about the future. Imagine living in a country with so little electricity that each household was allowed just one 40-watt light bulb. In Romania tonight, the future remains difficult and uncertain. Here's ABC's Mike Lee.
This was the way many Romanians were coping with the upheaval in the streets, by clinging to the only routine they know, tracking down scarce supplies of food before they disappear from the shelves. Food is a bitter political symbol because the communists exported most agricultural produce to pay off the foreign debt. This store reported a run on local champagne, as some Romanians spent up to a half-month's salary per bottle to celebrate what they hope will soon be a better standard of living. The children do not fully comprehend that history is in the making. At times, their faces seem to reflect the strain of not being able to play outside because their parents fear they may be shot by snipers. Some kids roam their apartment houses, making a game of singing holiday songs. Like most Romanians, Nicolae Nicoleta has for years been on the waiting list to buy a refrigerator. She must store her food outside the kitchen window.
Building a new life for these Romanians will not be easy. The Communist Party ran the country's economy into the ground. All the major institutions, everything from banks to factories to farms, even the local supermarket, have all been built and run on the old-style Stalinist system of central planning. That cannot be changed quickly.
Leaders of the Romanian Orthodox Church, who have long kept their political opinions to themselves, are suddenly speaking out.
It's great freedom for our country, and the church will have its place in the life of the nation.
Uncensored newspapers have been appearing for the first time. With her friends at her side, Nicolae Nicoleta summed up the mood of ordinary Romanians.
I can't explain you. I'm very happy, but sometimes I want to cry.
With so many civilians having been killed, families in Bucharest today brought their dead to a newly created cemetery. Amid the grief, centuries-old rituals were observed. Bread and cakes were offered for the spiritual travel to heaven. The news of Ceausescu's death did little to relieve the agony of those whose loved ones never knew more than a few hours of freedom. Mike Lee, ABC News, Bucharest.
The Bush administration has recognized the new provisional government of Romania, but criticized it for conducting the Ceausescu trial and executions in secret.
No more communists, the marchers chant, at the palace of the party that was Nicolae Ceausescu's puppet. The death of Ceausescu, confirmed by this picture, leaves a kind of political vacuum in the country he ruled absolutely, and his trial and his firing squad, quick and secret, raise questions about the style of those who want to succeed him. The new provisional government is headed by men whose qualifications include having been among the many communist officials Ceausescu dumped along the way. Tuesday, they ruled that all security forces will henceforth be under the army, an effort to distance themselves from the repression of the old regime. But it's not clear the public will buy that. To many, the party and Ceausescu are identical, and Ceausescu was the devil.
Hitler was a very small kid in comparison with this paranoid, because he is paranoid. He was paranoid. And, you know, we cannot be very happy in this moment because too many people are still dying in this moment on the streets, in the building.
The gunfire that ruined the peace of Christmas night subsided Tuesday after the army secured the Central Committee Palace where die-hard Ceausescu loyalists had been holding out. The heaviness of the fighting plain to see. And also the affection of the people for the soldiers and all who fought to topple the dictator. For Ceausescu's Securitate troops who've been killing soldiers and civilians, a different kind of reception. Behind the wall, a cemetery where lie the great and good of Romania's history. Right here, a public park is being turned into a cemetery for those who will be the heroes of this revolution. More than 200 graves, a fraction of what will be needed for those who have died in Bucharest. Some of them old enough to have known Romania before the communists took over. Some who never knew anything but Ceausescu.
I can't call this man Romanian. He is not a Romanian. He is just a monster, an assassin who destroyed his people and who killed children.
Dan Florian Ursu, age 21. A student member of the uprising, mourned by his childhood friend.
He was a wonderful man. He was different from the other people. I don't know why only special men must die.
Dan Florian was missing for 2 days before they found his body at a hospital. They think he was killed by snipers at the TV station.
We guess nobody knows exactly. He was already died. I guess he died immediately. He was shot in his heart. His great heart.
Richard Blystone, CNN, Bucharest.
One local political scientist predicts even more violence ahead for Romania. Ladis Christof says the overthrow of the government happened so quickly, there's bound to be more fallout. Pat Duggan has that.
Ladis Christof hasn't seen the home he grew up in since 1944, when the Soviets overran Romania. Today, Christof is a semi-retired political science professor and not at all surprised by the quick execution of Nicolae Ceausescu. Christof believes it was the only way to get the secret police to surrender.
To eliminate the possibility in anybody's mind that they could free him somehow and that the whole revolution can be turned back.
To illustrate just how oppressed the Romanian people were, Christof consults his rather sizable library, producing 2 books. One, a tribute to Stalin on his 70th birthday. The second book, dedicated to Ceausescu, is much larger.
This is the book published as an homage to Ceausescu on his 60th birthday. and how much bigger is the book published to Ceausescu.
Christoph predicts even more violence ahead in Romania, not only against the secret police, but also against anyone in a position of power, since Ceausescu demanded such absolute loyalty. Christoph made his own escape from Romania in 1948 by swimming across the Danube River. He has returned several times, twice as a Fulbright scholar, but never has been able to visit what once was his family home. That part of Romania was annexed to the Soviet Union.
But up to now, the Soviets did not let you go into the villages, only into certain so-called open towns. But I was hoping that now, with the change in the Soviet Union, I would be able to go also to see my village.
Life for Christoph these days is spent on his farm near Yamhill with his wife Jane, also a college professor. Christoph says he picked this spot because it reminded him so much of the countryside he knew as a boy. Pat Duggan, the 10 o'clock news.
A Lake Oswego surgeon will be part of a...
He credits the local Panamanian people as the true heroes in that conflict, and he says he plans to return to Panama as early as next month. Near Enumclaw, Bob Branham.
The new government of Romania has thrown out some of the most restrictive laws of the old regime. Newspapers, which have not been censored by the government, are now available. The new leaders also are getting rid of a law that prevented contact with foreigners and another that limited travel. It's also scrapping a law that banned the ownership of typewriters. The provisional government, which is serving only until the free elections in April, also chose a chairman for the governing council. The sight of former leader Ceausescu and his wife shot and killed by a firing squad was enough to persuade some of those loyal to them to surrender today. Meanwhile, the people the Ceausescu regime killed are being buried. In Bucharest, they had to turn this park into a cemetery to accommodate all the bodies. Some were old enough to remember a time when Ceausescu did not rule Romania. For others, he was the only leader they knew.
The population lived in poverty. Well, elsewhere this morning, fighting in Romania has subsided, but profound problems face that country as the new government takes over today.
Discord has risen over the provisional government, and as NBC's Dennis Murphy reports, building a new society from the ashes of a brutal past makes change difficult.
The provisional government, the president, a Communist Party officer, his prime minister and defense minister have been issuing proclamations from the television station. But there have been anti-communist demonstrations in the streets of Bucharest. They have chanted "Down with communism" and were successful in demanding that Iliescu, the provisional leader, meet with them and give them television time to read their platform. About 10 small political parties have formed in the last few days of chaos. One person in 4 in this former police state was a government informer. No one knows who to trust. The victims of the revolution, the hundreds killed in Bucharest street fighting, are being buried today. They threw themselves at a hated and decadent regime, but building a new society may prove as difficult as toppling a tyrant.
That was Dennis Murphy reporting. Food and medicine is pouring into Romania now. Japan has donated $1 million, the U.S. $500,000, and locally supplies from the Northwest Medical Team are being gathered for that country.
In other news,
Romania's new leaders are struggling to consolidate the revolution while the Romanian people see for themselves how it ended for Nicolae Ceausescu. Martha Teichner reports from Bucharest.
Defiant, arrogant, disbelieving. Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Ileana refused to recognize the secret court that executed them. Last night, Romanian television showed their trial, including Ceausescu's unrepentant harangues and his unseen accusers. His attitude to the end: "You can't do this to us." Captured members of the secret police still loyal to Ceausescu will face special military courts with the power to administer instant justice. Romania's provisional government has ordered the holdouts to turn themselves in by nightfall tomorrow or face the firing squad. The new government has used the force of Romania's suddenly respectable army, hoping to put an end to the bloody fighting that followed Ceausescu's overthrow.
But already questions are being asked about whether the revolution has been hijacked by Ceausescu's old guard, simply voicing new rhetoric while solidifying their power.
The new president, Ian Iliescu, was Communist Party secretary until Ceausescu stripped him of power. He is a personal friend of Mikhail Gorbachev. But communism with a new face isn't enough for the thousands of students who died, not just for an end to Ceausescu's brand of tyranny, but for democracy. There are so many dead that only the bodies that have been identified are being buried in the rows and rows of hurriedly dug graves. The rest are being trucked away and burned. The price of freedom has been high, but Romanians have proved they are willing to fight for it, no matter what the cost. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Bucharest.
Soviet leader Gorbachev.
Provisional government is beginning to dismantle the dictatorship of executed Nicolae Ceausescu. The new government includes communist officials as well as opposition leaders. They're lifting repressive laws and rounding up members of the hated security police for trial. The new government warns Ceausescu's followers to surrender by tomorrow or face execution.
Is trying to take shape and to take control of that war-torn country. Military tribunals have been set up throughout Romania to try members of the hated security forces. Correspondent Mike Lee is joining us live from Bucharest. He has the latest on the developing situation over there. Mike?
Mike, what we're seeing basically this morning is the scramble for power to fill the vacuum left by Ceausescu. On the one hand, we have the provisional government composed primarily of people who oppose Ceausescu, some of whom may have been in the party, and they are promising elections by next year. However, we're beginning to see the formation of other opposition parties. For example, the Romanian Democratic Party, comprised primarily of young people. They've been holding a rally, and they say that the provisional leadership is too closely tied with the establishment. So what we have is a number of groups saying we all want democracy, but we're the ones who ought to lead this country in that direction. In terms of the atmosphere here this morning, it's basically calm. There has been some sniping early this morning, in fact, right outside our hotel. This is because some of the secret police are still in hiding. The government today said that those police have until tomorrow to turn themselves in, or they will be tracked down and submitted to military justice. In other words, summary execution. As far as the general outlook is concerned, it's a day-by-day situation. Most of what the people find out here, they find out from Romanian television, which is controlled by the provisional government, and with the other opposition groups claiming that they ought to have more access. So already we're seeing that form of democracy, which could get even more volatile, at least politically, in the near future. Mike?
Thank you, Mike. Mike Lee reporting this morning from Bucharest.
Enter today.
It is now 8:38. More than 40 years ago, Princess Ileana of Romania was exiled from that country by the communists, along with the remaining members of her royal family. Her father, King Ferdinand, had ruled the country till his death in 1927. The princess left with her husband, an Austrian Archduke, and her 6 children. Today, at age 80, she lives in the United States, where she is known as the Reverend Mother Alexandra. In 1967, she took her monastic vows and founded a monastery in rural Pennsylvania that is part of the Romanian Orthodox Church in America, and she joins us this morning from WTAE-TV in Pittsburgh. And good morning, Mother Alexandra.
Good morning. I'm delighted to speak to you.
I think the entire world, of course, was surprised to see what went on in Romania over the past week, but for you, what has it been like for you to see this uprising?
Well, for me, it was a thing of very great emotion, both of joy and relief, and also of very great sorrow.
Were you surprised? Were you surprised to see it happen at this time?
I don't know if I was surprised or not, really. In a way, I was waiting for it to happen, because one saw it happening in all the other countries, and Romania seemed so terribly silent. But I always felt that there was something underneath that was going to come out, that would have to explode sometime. But that it should come in the way it did, that I did not expect, and I suppose nobody did.
And now you can see the pictures coming out of Romania today of people openly celebrating Christmas. What was that like to see those pictures?
Well, wonderful. And you know, one thing that for us seems today so strange, but they have had light for the first time on the streets. And that they rejoiced over so much. You know, they haven't had any lights in very little in their houses, and no lights on the streets at all, like in wartime.
You know, we think of Princess Ileana. I think that conjures up an image of kind of a fairy tale princess to many, but I was reading about your childhood in Romania, and it was very different, was it not?
Yes, it was very different. It was a very wonderful life. I think back on it with great joy and love. And it was fascinating and full of interesting work to be done. I had a lot to do with the Romanian young people, chiefly girls, but also with the boys. And so I helped to rebuild the country at that time, because after the First World War, we suddenly became from a small country a relatively large one. And we had to be all brought together, and there was a lot to be organized and done, and I threw myself into it with all my heart.
And here we are now at a time when, again, there's going to have to be great rebuilding. What do you see now for the future of Romania and what they need right now?
Well, I think that now they need to be helped from the outside. I think, unfortunately, it's a problem not only which touches Romania, but it touches all of Eastern Europe, and therefore, in fact, touches the rest of the world.
While everyone realized there was so much oppression, I know a lot of people question the execution of the leader there. What were your feelings as far as that?
Well, I'm sorry, of course, in a way that it happened as it did. But as far as I understand, it had to be done. If they hadn't, the fighting would have become worse. They had to discourage the resistance of the security forces.
Is there any thought now that you or your nephew, King Michael, who I believe is living now in Switzerland, that either of you might go back to Romania? Would you like to go back to Romania?
That's a question which is very difficult to answer. First of all, I think it's a question that has to be settled in Romania itself, first of all. And as far as I know, what the king feels, and I think we all feel, is that it's the Romanian people who have suffered. It's the Romanian people who have to decide when they are free, what they really want to do. Because certainly communism wasn't what they chose.
Yeah. Well, I know that there are elections. The elections have been called for now for April. But we thank you for joining us this morning and giving us your views. Mother Alexandra, thank you very much. We should also thank Channel 11 in Pittsburgh, WPXI, for helping us get that remote. And we'll be back. Joanna Kearns and Dan Lawyer.
We'll get another blast of Arctic air.
First, Romania, where dissident leaders have formed a new government following the execution of Nicolae Ceausescu. The new leadership won the immediate support of the United States and the Soviet Union. The execution brought an uneasy quiet to the streets of Bucharest this morning. Soldiers that have been fighting in Ceausescu's name are reportedly starting to surrender in large numbers. The ravages of battle are evident everywhere. The main palace is gutted. Buildings everywhere are damaged or destroyed. Last night, Romanian TV broadcast pictures of Ceausescu and his wife in captivity. The government says they were tried on numerous charges, including genocide. Shortly after these pictures were taken, they were executed by firing squad.
Ceausescu's execution was grimly welcome news to Romanian immigrants in the United States. For many, Ceausescu's brutal regime was the reason they fled their homeland.
Today, the terrorist Ceausescu and his wife has been executed.
At the United Nations, about 100 Romanians heard about the execution during a memorial service for those who died fighting the Ceausescu regime. Some were disappointed that the deposed leader was not given a public trial.
He died very easily. He should have suffered like everybody else.
He destroyed people. He was maybe worse than Hitler.
Lord Jesus Christ.
In Los Angeles, Romanian immigrants celebrated Christmas Mass and the emergence of a new era in their homeland. But when word of the execution spread through the congregation, there was unrestrained joy. After the service, there were tears for Romania, but not for Ceausescu.
As a Christian, I feel sorry, but he got...
Czechoslovakia. Ceausescu used the army as a labor force. Soldiers built roads, picked potatoes, dug canals. He prevented the officer corps from developing any real expertise. What they developed instead was resentment at their systematic humiliation.
As a result of the support which the army gave to the revolution in Romania, its esteem with the general populace has gone up enormously.
On the balcony from which the late leader of Romania addressed the masses, there was a changing of the guard today and a changing mood. In a vote of confidence for the military, the provisional government promoted all majors to the rank of colonel, and all colonels became generals. Bob Simon, CBS News, Bucharest.
country's name, dropping the words Socialist Republic. The army, meanwhile, declared victory. Tanks that were guarding the center of Bucharest returned to their bases today, although scattered sniper